All right, let's be real. Everyone complains. You do it, I do it, and sometimes it feels like the whole world runs on complaints. The weather sucks, work is stressful, the line at the coffee shop is too long. It's almost like complaining is hardwired into us. But here's the real question. Does it actually help? At first, complaining feels good. It gives us a little hit of relief, like venting steam from a pressure cooker. When we're frustrated, stressed, or feel powerless, complaining makes us feel like we're doing something about it. But here's the catch. It doesn't actually fix anything. It just tricks us into thinking we're taking action when we're really just making noise. That's exactly why Friedrich Nietzsche had no patience for complainers. To him, whining about your problems wasn't just useless. It was a sign of weakness. It meant you lacked the strength to face life head on. He believed that suffering is an unavoidable part of life, so you have two choices. Either you use it to grow, or you let it break you. Complaining falls into that second category. Nietzsche saw complaining as something deeper than just blowing off steam. He saw it as a symptom of resentment, a psychological crutch that weak people use when they feel powerless. Instead of changing their situation, they lash out at the world, blaming others, circumstances, or fate. But does that mindset ever lead to real strength? No. It just traps people in a cycle of bitterness. So, if complaining doesn't actually solve anything, what should we do instead? That's where Nietzsche's philosophy comes in. Not to escape suffering, but to embrace and overcome it. Let's break that down next. Suffering is a fact of life. You don't get to opt out of it. The question isn't if you'll suffer, but how you deal with it. Every major religion and philosophy has wrestled with this problem. Some try to explain it, some try to escape it, and some try to justify it. Take Christianity, for example. The Christian answer to suffering is simple. This world is broken, but heaven will fix it. Pain is a test, a lesson, or a punishment for sin. If you endure it with faith, you'll be rewarded in the afterlife. It's a perspective that gives suffering meaning, but at the cost of making people passive. Why fight to change your situation if eternal happiness is right around the corner? Then there's Schopenhauer, Nietzsche's biggest philosophical rival. Schopenhauer looked at life and said, "Yeah, this sucks." He believed the world was driven by an endless blind force he called the will to life, and because of that, suffering was unavoidable. His solution? Detach from life. Stop chasing desires, stop engaging in the world, and just let go. Buddhism has a similar take. Suffering comes from attachment, so the goal is to eliminate desire itself. Nietzsche saw all of this and said, no, that's weakness. He rejected the idea that suffering should be escaped, justified, or ignored. To him, life wasn't something you put up with. It was something you conquered. He believed that suffering wasn't just inevitable, but necessary. Pain wasn't an obstacle, but fuel. And that brings us to Nietzsche's answer. Instead of running from suffering, you use it to build strength. He wanted people to stop looking for excuses, stop blaming the world, and start becoming stronger. Complaining? That's a waste of time. The real question is, what are you going to do about it? Next, let's break down Nietzsche's perspective on suffering and why he believed it was a gift, not a curse. Most people see suffering as something to avoid. Nietzsche saw it as the price of greatness. He didn't just accept suffering, he believed it was essential for growth, strength, and meaning. To Nietzsche, suffering wasn't an unfair burden or a punishment. It was a test, a challenge, a way to separate the strong from the weak. He had no sympathy for people who sat around feeling sorry for themselves. If life knocked you down, you had two choices: stay down and whine about it, or get up and fight back. Complaining was just a way of admitting defeat. He thought most people, especially the ones obsessed with religion or morality, used suffering as an excuse. They blamed the world, other people, or sin instead of facing reality. Nietzsche had no patience for that. He believed suffering wasn't something to explain away or pray away. It was something to use. Every hardship, every failure, every painful experience was a chance to become stronger. His message was simple. Stop waiting for the world to change. Change yourself. Struggle makes you powerful, not comfort. Hardship isn't an excuse to complain. It's an opportunity to grow. He summed it up perfectly. That which does not kill me makes me stronger. It's not just a motivational quote. It's a challenge. Can you take the pain life throws at you and turn it into power? Or will you crumble and look for someone to blame? That's the difference between strength and weakness. Next, let's talk about what separates these two mindsets and why Nietzsche believed the weak were their own worst enemy. When life gets tough, people go in one of two directions. They either rise to the challenge or they break under the weight of it. Nietzsche believed this was the fundamental divide between the strong and the weak. The strong don't waste time complaining. They don't sit around blaming others, wallowing in self-pity, or waiting for someone to save them. When they suffer, they ask, how can I use this? How can I get stronger? They see pain as a tool, not a punishment. Every hardship is a lesson. Every failure is fuel. Every setback is just another chance to push forward. The weak, on the other hand, do the opposite. Instead of facing their struggles, they avoid them, blame them on someone else, or pretend they're victims of the universe. They use suffering as an excuse. Instead of getting stronger, they cling to their misery and expect the world to feel sorry for them. Nietzsche thought this mindset was poisonous. Why? Because it doesn't just make people weak, it makes them resentful. Weak people hate the strong because they remind them of their own failure. They don't want to rise up, they want to pull everyone else down. Look around today. How often do you see people whining about things they could fix if they just put in the effort? How many people make their whole identity about their struggles instead of overcoming them? That's the weakness Nietzsche warned about. The strong accept suffering and grow from it. The weak complain and let it define them. The question is, which one are you? Next, we'll talk about how this weak mindset leads to something even worse: resentment. Weak people don't just suffer, they hold on to their suffering. Instead of using pain to grow, they let it fester. And when they realize they can't change their situation, they look for someone to blame. This is what Nietzsche called resentment, or ressentiment. Resentment isn't just anger, it's deeper, more toxic. It's when someone feels powerless but refuses to take responsibility. They don't fix their problems, they look for enemies. They convince themselves that life is unfair, that others are to blame, that the strong must be evil because they succeeded where they failed. Instead of saying, I want to be strong, the resentful person says, strength is bad. Instead of striving to be great, they convince themselves that greatness itself is the problem. This is why weak people love tearing others down. It gives them a fake sense of power. Look at how often people do this today. Someone succeeds, and instead of admiration, they get hate. Instead of working hard, people demand fairness by dragging others down. Instead of self-improvement, they look for excuses. That's resentment in action. Nietzsche believed this was the root of slave morality, a system of values created by the weak to justify their weakness. Instead of admitting they were powerless, they made power itself the enemy. They turned suffering into a virtue and called it good. But here's the truth. Resentment never leads to strength. It just keeps people stuck in their misery. Next, let's break down why complaining is the first symptom of resentment, and why it's a trap. Let's be honest. Complaining feels good. It's like scratching an itch. When something frustrates you, venting about it brings a little relief. But here's the problem. It doesn't actually solve anything. Complaining is just an emotional release, not an action. Nietzsche saw complaining as the first symptom of resentment. It's what people do when they feel powerless but don't want to take responsibility. Instead of fixing their problems, they make noise about them. Instead of taking action, they seek sympathy. Complaining lets them feel like they're doing something, when really they're doing nothing. Think about it. Have you ever met someone who's always complaining about their job, their life, or the unfair world? But year after year, nothing changes. They don't actually quit. They don't work harder. They don't take risks. They just complain because it makes them feel better without requiring them to do anything. That's why Nietzsche saw complaining as a trap. It tricks people into thinking they're fighting back when they're really just wasting energy. It gives them a fake sense of power, an imaginary revenge against the world. Instead of using pain to grow, they just sit in it. And the worst part? Complaining attracts other complainers. Misery loves company, and people who constantly whine tend to surround themselves with others who do the same. Before long, they're stuck in a cycle where no one actually gets stronger. They just reinforce each other's weakness. Nietzsche's solution? Shut up and do something. The strong don't waste time complaining, they take action. Next, let's look at how Nietzsche connects this mindset to Christianity and anarchism. Two belief systems he saw as built on resentment. Nietzsche saw two groups that perfectly embodied resentment: Christians and anarchists. On the surface, they seem different. One focuses on faith, the other on politics. But at their core, Nietzsche argued, they both share the same weak mindset. Let's start with Christianity. Nietzsche wasn't just critical of religion. He saw it as a morality built by the weak to justify their own powerlessness. Christianity preaches humility, meekness, and turning the other cheek. All things that sound virtuous, but in Nietzsche's view were just ways for the weak to cope with their suffering. Instead of striving for strength, Christians embraced weakness and called it good. They created a system where the poor, the suffering, and the powerless were morally superior. It wasn't about improving. Justifying their failure became the goal. Then there's anarchism. Nietzsche used this term broadly, referring not just to political anarchists, but to anyone in the lower classes who resented the rich and powerful. Instead of working to better themselves, anarchists wanted to tear down those who had succeeded. They disguised their resentment as a call for justice or equality, but Nietzsche saw through it. They didn't want fairness. They wanted revenge. Both groups, Nietzsche argued, use moral superiority as a weapon. Instead of admitting, I am weak and I want to be strong, they flip the script. Weakness is actually good and strength is evil. The result? A world where suffering wasn't something to overcome. It was something to be proud of. This, Nietzsche warned, was the ultimate danger of resentment. Instead of pushing people to grow, it encouraged them to stay weak while demanding that the strong apologize for their strength. Sound familiar? It should. It's everywhere today. But there's another way. Instead of complaining, instead of resenting, Nietzsche offers a radical idea: affirm life. Next, we'll explore how his philosophy turns suffering into fuel for greatness. So, if complaining is useless and resentment is poison, what's the alternative? Nietzsche had a simple answer: affirm life. Instead of running from suffering, embrace it. Instead of resenting challenges, see them as fuel for strength. This idea is at the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy, and he pushed it to its ultimate test with a thought experiment called eternal recurrence. Imagine this. A demon comes to you and says, "This life you are living right now, every single moment of it, you will have to live again and again, forever, exactly the same way. Every joy, every success, but also every failure, every moment of suffering, repeated endlessly. Would you celebrate that? Or would you collapse under the weight of it?" For Nietzsche, this is the ultimate measure of strength. If the idea of living your life on repeat forever sounds unbearable, it means you're living wrong. It means you're still running from suffering instead of using it. The goal, then, is to live in a way where you would welcome eternal recurrence with open arms. This is the opposite of complaining. Instead of wishing life were different, you own every part of it, even the painful ones. You stop looking for someone to blame. You stop wishing things were easier. You become the kind of person who doesn't just survive suffering, you thrive in it. Nietzsche called this attitude amor fati, the love of fate. It's not just accepting life, but loving it exactly as it is. No excuses, no self-pity, no resentment, just strength. This, Nietzsche believed, was the path to true power. And it's a mindset you can adopt today. But will you? That's the real question. Let's wrap this up with a challenge, a way for you to stop complaining and start living. All right, let's be real. Most people won't change. They'll keep complaining, keep blaming, keep sitting in resentment. Why? Because it's easier. It takes no effort to whine. It takes no courage to be a victim. But you don't have to be like most people. Nietzsche's challenge is simple. Stop wasting energy on things you can't change and start taking control of what you can. Instead of looking for excuses, look for ways to grow. Instead of blaming others, take full ownership of your life. The moment you drop the complaints, you take your power back. The next time you catch yourself complaining, ask, is this helping me in any way? If not, drop it. What can I do to change this situation? If something, do it. If nothing, move on. How can I use this challenge to become stronger? Find the lesson. Take the hit. Get better. That's it. No magic, no shortcut. Just radical self-responsibility. Nietzsche believed life is for the strong. Not the physically strong, but the mentally unbreakable. The ones who take suffering and use it to build something great. The ones who, no matter what life throws at them, can still look it in the face and say, yes. So here's the challenge. Can you go 1 week without complaining? No excuses. No whining, just action. Try it. See how it changes your mindset. And if you do it right, you might just find that the life you once wanted to escape is actually the life you were meant to conquer. Because the truth is, the world doesn't care about your complaints. It only respects your strength, your move.